This morning I want to talk about faith, the development of it, and why we want to develop it. And maybe I'll start with the why. It takes faith to go beyond conventional reality. And conventional reality, what we mean by that is what we see, hear, taste, touch, smell, think. That's all wound up in the conditioning of our own personality and conditioning from our culture, our society, our history. And everything that we can perceive in those ways through ordinary reasoning or logical thought, even from anything that pops up from the past, it's all part of our conditioning. But awakening is beyond that, and what we might call ultimate reality or nibbana or pure consciousness or whatever words we might put to it is beyond what we can perceive with the senses. Every religion points at that. And that's where the true relief from suffering is. So it takes faith. And the faith can be developed in different ways. Or we might think of different kinds of faith. Leaving aside entirely blind faith, where you just are supposed to pick it up, whatever you're told. And just let that one aside. But when we think about development of faith that is solid, one more thing about that blind faith part. If we're expected to just believe based on being told we should, and we haven't really learned how to validate or verify that faith, I think there's always doubt underneath. And particularly when people become very adamant that their faith is correct, I think really there's doubt underneath. So we don't want to do that, and the Buddha did not encourage that. In fact, he was very clear that if we, just believe something because we're supposed to, or because we think it might be the right thing, it could turn out to be true, or it could turn out to be false. Either way. So you can believe in something really strongly, and it could turn out to be true or false. You could not believe in something, and it still could turn out to be true or false. So what he wanted us to do, and what we see practitioners doing, and what we see people who have realized Nibbana in this lifetime that they have done, is to really use the faith of suspecting, at least, that there's something beyond the conventional, and then develop the capabilities which come in these 5 powers through samadhi, through mindfulness, but also through virtue, which is not among these 5 powers, but essential, and wisdom, and energy. And so developing this deep understanding and confidence, another way of translating sadha, is essential to what we might call breaking through. So one of the ways that faith comes to us is through inspiration. You might even think of it as a type of faith, inspirational faith, something you read or hear or experience that really brings a kind of enthusiasm to the heart. And we may feel inspired for a while, but inspiration also is variable. Even for people who have committed their entire life to the practice, they may be inspired during some periods of time and the inspiration fall away. But when the inspiration is there, we can really use it for practice. And it's beautiful, and we can use it to develop a more grounded, steady faith. There's also faith that can come from reflection. Reflection on the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. The chanting we did this morning is probably part of that, where we're chanting these words, and eventually, as we chant them in the monasteries, usually every day, it starts to sink in, and you start to reflect, and then you start to notice these qualities that actually are there, and that's how the faith develops. So one of the things I want to recommend to you today as you practice is picking up maybe some reflection on those qualities. You can use the chanting book to look at them if you want to, or just reflecting on what you know about the qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of Dhamma, or the qualities of enlightened Sangha. And a third sort of aspect or kind of faith is the faith that we have when we make an aspiration, when we aspire to awakening, or when we aspire to development of a quality that supports us. And this kind of faith also brings joy to the heart. All of them do, really. Bringing joy to the heart, which is so crucial for developing the stillness and solidity of mind. And eventually for opening up. See, do I like that phraseology? I don't think so. Could be instantaneously, doesn't have to be eventually. The mind opening up to insight. What we want to do is make ourselves available to knowing and seeing the truth of reality. And this is part of how we do it. I want to share a story with you from the suttas. And this is I see this as being about faith or confidence, and it's a story about why the Buddha's followers had that confidence in him. So this comes from the middle-length discourses. It's called the Greater Discourse to Sakulodayan. And this was a wanderer. When the Buddha refers to him, he calls him Udayan. He was a wanderer of another sect. And one morning when the Buddha was going to go for alms in Rajagaha, he said to himself, well, it's a little too early to do that. I'm going to go to the park of the wanderers. So, can you imagine, like ancient India, so many of these spiritual teachers kind of being around and, people gathering together and talking about spiritual matters or who knows what else. And in this case, it was one of those times when Udayan is there with a large group of his followers, and they're just chatting about stuff, and then the Buddha comes in the distance, and he says, shh, let's see if the Blessed One wants to come over here. And the Buddha does come over, and Udayan gives the Buddha the high seat, and he sits on the low seat. So obviously he really has a lot of respect for the Buddha. And the Buddha says, what conversation did I interrupt? And he said, let's not talk about that. But I want to talk, he says he wants to talk about recent conversations with some other wanderers, about some of the lead teachers that were around. And he says, many of these recluses and Brahmins, these different spiritual seekers of various sects, had been gathering together, and they were sitting together talking. And they were saying to each other, it's such a great gain for the people of this country that there are so many good teachers, heads of orders, heads of groups, teachers of groups, well-known and famous, founders of sects, regarded by many as saints, who have come to spend their time here in this area of Rajagaha. And then he lists the different ones. There's a list that you usually see, these various teachers who are well known. And then they started to say to each other, so now among these worthy teachers, heads of orders, etc., who are regarded by many as saints, that means regarded by many as enlightened, who are honored and respected and revered and venerated by among them, who is honored, respected, venerated by their disciples, and how, honoring and respecting them, do those disciples live in dependence on them. So then one of those teachers' names is brought up. And someone says, but their disciples don't respect them. In fact, this teacher is sitting, talking, and some disciple in his group says, don't ask him this question, ask me this question, because he doesn't know. And then the teacher, it says, did not get his way, though he waved his arms and wailed, be quiet, sirs, be quiet, don't make noise, I'm talking. They didn't listen to him. So they took these, as they were discussing, like, yeah, he doesn't really get their honor and respect. And they went on to talk about other teachers in the same way. But then they brought up the Buddha, the recluse Gautama, who is the head of an order, head of a group, teacher of a group, well-known, famous founder of this sect. And they say once, when the recluse Gautama was teaching his Dhamma to an assembly of several hundred followers, there was a certain disciple who cleared his throat, and then his companion in the holy life nudged him with his knee to indicate, be quiet, make no noise, the Blessed One is teaching us the Dhamma. When the recluse Gautama is teaching the Dhamma to an assembly of several hundred followers, there's no sound from his disciples. This large assembly is poised in expectancy. Let us hear the Dhamma the Blessed One is about to teach. And then they use a simile, just as though a man were at a crossroads pressing out pure honey, and a large group of people were poised in expectancy. So then the Buddha asks Udayan, How many qualities do you see in me because of which my disciples honor, respect, revere, and venerate me and live in dependence on me, honoring and respecting me? And Udayan says, I see 5 qualities. And the Buddha asks him what they are, and he says, well, the Blessed One eats little and commends eating little. That's the first one. He's content with any kind of robe, commends being contented with any kind of robe. That's the second one. The third one is he's content with any kind of alms food and commends that contentment. And the fourth one, he's content with any kind of resting place and commends contentment with any kind of resting place. And fifth, the Blessed One is secluded and commends seclusion. I mean, these are some things that people often are really very awed by. Living a very renunciant ascetic life. But the Buddha says to him, well, if that's why if my disciples honor and respect me because of that, then I have to say that there are disciples of mine who live on a cup full or half a cup full of food. But sometimes I eat a full contents of my alms bowl and even more. How would they honor and respect me for that? And then he says, I have some disciples who wear rag robes, refuse rag robes. They just find cloth wherever, cast away cloth, wearers of coarse robes. They collect rags from charnel grounds, rubbish heaps, and shops, and make them into patched robes and wear them. But sometimes I wear robes given by householders, robes so fine that pumpkin hair is coarse in comparison. And in terms of being one who is content with any kinds of alms food, I have disciples who are alms food eaters who go on unbroken alms round from house to house. Now what this means is when you're going for alms with your bowl, you would stop at every house even though you know some places give really good food and some places don't. You just take whatever is offered and that's what you eat. But he said sometimes I eat on invitation to meals where there's choice rice and many sauces and curries. And those disciples of mine, how would they respect me for that? If that's what they respect me for, they wouldn't really be respecting me. And then he says, talks about any kind of resting place. There are disciples of mine who are tree root dwellers and open air dwellers who do not use a roof for 8 months of the year. But I sometimes live in gabled mansions, plastered within and without, protected against the wind and secured by door bolts with shuttered windows. So if this is why they honor me, they wouldn't. And finally, the recluse Gautama is honored for seclusion and commends seclusion. He says, well, I have some disciples who are forest dwellers, dwellers in remote resting places, who live withdrawn in remote jungle thicket resting places and return to the midst of the Sangha only once each half month for recitation of the Patimokkha. But sometimes I live surrounded by bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, by men and women lay followers, by kings and kings' ministers, and by other sectarians and their disciples. So if my disciples honor me with that thought, that I'm in seclusion and commend seclusion, those who are forest dwellers, etc., would not be honoring and respecting me. Vadudayan, there are 5 other qualities because of which my disciples do honor, respect, and venerate me, and live in dependence on me, honoring and respecting me. So, of course, these are the ones we want to consider. The first one is, my disciples esteem me for higher virtue. The recluse Gautama is virtuous. He possesses the supreme aggregate of virtue. Not killing, not stealing, no sexual activity, no lying ever. Etc. Beautiful virtue. They esteem me for excellent knowledge and vision. They say that Gautama, when he says he knows, he truly knows, and when he sees, he truly sees. The recluse Gautama teaches the Dhamma through direct knowledge, not without direct knowledge. He teaches the Dhamma with a sound basis, not without a sound basis. He teaches the Dhamma in a convincing manner, not in an unconvincing manner. And this kind of direct knowledge is a very important terminology that we see for ourselves. The Buddha saw for himself. He described what he saw the night of his enlightenment. And we also want to put in the causes and conditions to see directly for ourselves. What do we want to see? We want to see that everything in conventional reality is impermanent, that is connected with suffering, and it's not a self and does not belong to a self. Third, my disciples esteem me for higher wisdom. The recluse Gautama is wise. He possesses the supreme aggregate of wisdom. It is impossible that he should not foresee the implications of an assertion, or that he should not be able to confute with reasons the current doctrines of others. Fourth, when my disciples have met with suffering and become victims of suffering, prey to suffering, they come to me and ask me about the noble truth of suffering. Being asked, I explain to them the noble truth of suffering, and I satisfy their minds with my explanation. They ask me about the noble truth of the origin of suffering, about the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, and about the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. And being asked, I explain to them the noble truths, and I satisfy their minds. And fourth, here he talks about the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the 4 kinds of right striving, the 4 bases of spiritual power, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers, 7 enlightenment factors, and the Noble Eightfold Path. All part of the wholesome states that we want to develop. So those are the reasons to respect and revere the Buddha and develop faith in the Buddha. So today, as you practice, try reflecting on what really inspires you, what you might have felt inspiration, that kind of, clear inspiration, or clear faith that just rises in you, or that you really just take those qualities, the ones in the chanting or the ones that you know that the Buddha possesses, and reflect on those. Or reflect on your own aspiration. Or maybe your own doubt. You know, what is it that I don't yet know myself? And do we want to let go of whatever it is that's in the way of really seeing for ourselves? I think this is a huge part of opening the way for inspiration, for wisdom to arise, is that I'm really be willing to put down whatever it is that might be holding me back. And to notice that even that aspiration requires faith, that there's already faith in you, even to be here, to come to something like this. Many of you have been practicing for many years. You've experienced your own faith developing, I know. If you're pretty new to this, there's some reason you came. There's some amount of curiosity, an idea that there is a way out of this suffering. Notice when you're reflecting on faith, if it brings you joy. And if not, then make some adjustments to the way you're thinking about it. Just see how you might relax into stillness, relax into the beauty of this place, relax into whatever level of confidence already exists in you, and open yourself to more. One of the main ways I think that practitioners develop their faith is by seeing their own progress, the things that have changed in the way that we meet life over the time of your practice. The path works.